baptize the babies after they're aborted.
Right.
Christen them, baptize them, and then, of course, put them into the incinerator.
Are we the only ones that see a problem with this deal? With
No,
the
I don't think we
Baptist
are.
guy and the chaplain at Tiller's or whatever he is?
You know that old hymn, "It is well with my soul"?
Yeah.
I believe that people want pastors around them when they're doing evil things to say, it's well with your soul. God is okay with you. You're still going to heaven. In fact, they want it more than most Christians because they feel the weight of their consciences bearing them down into hell.
Well, think about this guy, Lucina, or you think about Jenkins at Notre Dame or whoever, but this guy right here, do you want to go to judgment like with this, under these circumstances?
I don't want to stand there.
Is that there were 12 disciples.
Right.
One of them was Judas.
Right.
One of them was Judas.
Right.
Just because somebody claimed they're a follower of Christ means nothing in the end.
And it's clear in the Scriptures that those that teach the Scriptures will be weighed in a much heavier light to a higher standard.
Judgment starts right there.
Oh my goodness, I'm afraid to be near this guy.
This guy right here. If God's going to send a lightning bolt and get him, I just hope he's a good shot if I'm nearby. I don't want to be the innocent bystander that's written about in the paper. Well, anyway, on to happier thoughts.
Good.
We have introduced this project. We've been working on it now for between 2 and 3 years. Carol and I have lost track of how much time we've actually spent on it. It's been well over 2 years, though. What this thing started out as, I'm writing a new book, and I've kind of set that on the background for right now. And one chapter in this book was going to be about some things that we had found out in the research for the book, which was that abortion was being used as an instrument of black genocide. And we were going to write a chapter in this book. And we had discovered a few things, and some things that were pretty interesting. And I was going over it with Johnny one day and some other black leaders that were here in the office. And Johnny says, well, you know, this needs to be a book by itself that goes just to the black community.
That one chapter.
Yeah. And I just showed Johnny the stuff that we had found just in that. And that was the very early stuff that we had found. And Johnny's hammering on me about this has got to be a book by itself. And so we started, the conversation continues, and then I think it was Pastor Broden says, well, you have to understand the quickest way to hide something from the black community is to put it in a book. And
or anybody.
Anybody, it doesn't matter, they don't have to be black.
Even Will Ford came and backed it up, remember?
Yeah, Will Ford came in, and he's a pastor from Fort Worth. He said, yeah, that's right. If you write something in a book, black people aren't going to know about it because they're not going to read it. This is not a culture that reads anymore. And everything's done by video. And so Johnny then kind of started hammering on me to do a video on this. And it just kind of grew and grew. And so we stopped all the research on the rest of the book, and we're fixing to start back on it now. But we stopped all the research on that, started researching just this. Carol Novielli, my assistant here that did all the research on the thing. And the stuff we have found is, I believe, unbelievable. I mean, it's incredible. We can now link from the days of the late 1700s before slavery ended to 2009. We can link those two together with no gaps in the story.
Yeah, completely seamless.
And what we show is that abortion today is a continuation of a strategy that began before slavery ended, with the anticipation that slavery was going to end and what was going to happen with black people once slavery was over. The strategies that they came up with right then just continued on, and when one of them would fail, they'd come up with another one, and when it would fail, they'd come up with another one until they got to the one that worked, which was abortion. And the aha moment for me, when we lay this thing out on a timeline and look and say, okay, which things happened at the same time? Because I'm not a big believer in coincidence. When I see things lining up, I'm really suspicious. And what you look at, and we've all heard these people say, well, like Planned Parenthood was opposed to abortion, Margaret Sanger was opposed to abortion, Alan Guttmacher was opposed to abortion, and they were, up until a point. And some things started lining up. When we started looking at these things that had been tried and failed, we got to the point of when they were doing forced sterilizations, and I don't think many people know that they set up these eugenics boards, and that 31 states in America had eugenics boards that were doing forced sterilizations, 31 states. And the last one didn't end until the 1980s. Right. Oregon had the last eugenics board, and it didn't disband until 1983. But when in the 60s, when they were really hot and heavy on the forced sterilization deal, they began to get concerned that the Supreme Court was going to rule that they were unconstitutional, which lower courts had already started doing. And so they started seeing that sterilization was not going to be the solution to getting rid of all the blacks like they had planned since the 1800s. And the biggest book on that was written in the 1940s, by the way. So sterilization was starting to go away. About that same time, blacks in America were starting to demand their civil rights. We're talking about the mid-60s. And this is where the term burn, baby, burn came from. The radical blacks, if you want to call them that, stood up and said, we'll burn this country to the ground if we don't get the rights that every other American has had. So we had things like Watts and Chicago and Cleveland, and you had all these towns around the country just burning. Literally, Cleveland almost burned to the ground, or parts of it did. Well, that was happening. At the same time, when we started putting this timeline together, what we saw was that it was at this time when they were losing sterilization, and when they were losing, the blacks were starting to riot and say, we're demanding our rights. First time, that's when these people all changed their minds, and the federal government changed its mind and started demanding the legalization of abortion. And I don't think that those things were coincidence, that all three of these things happened at exactly the same time on the timeline.
I remember, Mark, when you showed me that chapter in that room, and the organizer, it's wonderful watching people do research because I loved it because you could back up everything. You showed me books and things I had never, I'm going like, oh my goodness, these people actually wrote this? Whoa! Right. You know, there are some things. You're a marked man, now I'm telling you, from this project. And because I looked at that timeline, and I remember a number of us walked around the room and we watched it, and there were little things we noticed. Wow, well, you know, when slavery was over, oh, look what they tried to do here. Oh, my goodness. Well, look, finally we got, look at Jim Crow law. Whoa, we thought that. Look what happened there. Every time blacks was getting ready to do something, the ante went up. Right. Especially coming from the population controllers.
Well, the population control was about black population control.
Exactly. And I tell you, when it got to that last one, and right when blacks are now getting past Jim Crow and we're ready to move on, and boy, oh boy, Mark, well, there are things that blacks have always suspected.
Yeah. And we've connected the dots.
Brother.
And I'll tell you what, I've learned things. I've been at this 30 years, and I've been working full-time in the pro-life movement for 22. I've learned things in the last 2-3 years since we've been doing this project that I never heard of, I never dreamed of, I never knew was happening. I just never connected all the dots.
Right.
And, you know, first, one of the most astonishing things that I learned in this research, if I said to you guys, who was the first pro-life group? Well, you might say, well, National Right to Life or American Life League or whoever, and you go back, or is the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops or whatever. It's stunning to learn that the first pro-life groups in this country were the Black Panthers, the Nation of Islam, right, and all of these, what are now, or what at the time were considered radical black civil rights groups. They were the first pro-life groups in the country because they had seen that it was black genocide. Right. And we have found all of these quotes and all of these documents that confirmed that these guys, and we've even talked to some of them from that era, they saw what was going on. Right. The problem was that you had sellouts like Jesse Jackson. I mean, Jesse Jackson, and we've got a ton of his quotes in here, some of them that I'd heard before, some of them that we found I'd never heard.
Who started out being pro-life?
Jesse, in his earlier days, was one of the first person who raised that question.
Right, and he was one, you know, I thought when I saw that thing, all these things lining up, I think, well, this is just some fat white guy in Denton, Texas. What do I know? Jesse Jackson, when we started studying this, said exactly the same thing. He said, it's very strange that at the minute we said we're going to demand our constitutional rights, they suddenly start talking about abortion. Right. They had always said, no, we don't want abortion, it's wrong, it's murder, we're not going to do it. But the second that sterilization is being taken away from them, and we're saying we want our rights, all of a sudden, the most important civil rights issue in America is a woman's right to choose. Right. And Jesse Jackson was saying these things, but Jesse Jackson wanted to be president, and the Democratic Party, and we've got all these quotes, and the stuff that we found just has blown me away.
You know, those earlier civil rights guys, even for Black Panthers, a lot of groups was really targeted because they were so radical. But the truth of it is they were radical because they knew it was a radical moment. Right. They always informed, educated, and they activated. That was the key things. And And I think the project that you've just completed and helped out with here, and we got some black folks in this thing, and I am in this one project does what the Black Panthers and other organizations were trying to do in the first place: inform, educate. Right. And boy, the activation comes after this one.
Well, you know, what we've done, just so people know, is we've produced a documentary. It's called Ma'afa 21. Ma'afa is the Swahili word that's used to describe the time of slavery, and 21 relates to the 21st century. What we're
kind of like the black genocide of Ma'afa.
It is.
Swahili means something so horrible, just devastating.
Right.
Like a black Holocaust.
And well, that's exactly what they call it, the Black Holocaust. It's called Ma'afa in Swahili. So we took that word, put 21 with it for the 21st century. Because if anybody thinks that slavery ended in 1865, they're nuts. It changed forms. People weren't kept on the plantations. Maybe they could leave if they wanted to. But when you start looking at some of the things that we found, Francis Galton, who created eugenics, at the same time, blacks were being freed. This is another one of these things that locked up, you know. Francis Galton, the father of eugenics, creates eugenics at the same time blacks are being freed. Francis Galton